23. Black celebrities who kept their lovers a secret until death. What if the biggest secret behind some of your favorite black icons wasn't their talent, but who they loved? Behind the Fame Awards and headlines were hidden relationships, quiet heartbreaks, and truths they took to the grave. From global superstars to civil rights giants, these 23 black celebrities carried the weight of love society refused to accept. Why were they forced to hide? And what does it say about the world they lived in and the one we live in now? Stick around as we uncover the hidden love lives that history tried to erase. Subscribe now to Legends of Black Excellence. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston's voice was a miracle, powerful, soulful, and capable of moving generations. But while her talent placed her on the global stage, her personal life remained a tangle of secrecy, pain, and quiet yearning. At the core of this complexity was a relationship that would remain unspoken for decades, her deep bond with best friend and assistant Robin Crawford. The two met in the early 1980s when Whitney was still an unknown teenager, and Robin worked at a community center in East Orange, New Jersey. Their connection was immediate, emotionally intimate, and by many accounts, romantic. Crawford, in her 2019 memoir, A Song for You, confirmed that their relationship began as a physical one, but ended that aspect early on, due to the immense pressure from Whitney's inner circle, particularly her mother, Cissy Houston. In a 2013 interview, Cissy stated openly that she wouldn't have condoned a gay relationship, adding another layer of tension and silence. Houston's career took off at lightning speed, gracing the covers of magazines, topping charts, and becoming America's sweetheart. Yet the more famous she became, the more she had to distance herself from her true emotional world. Rumors swirled for years, but the singer consistently denied any romantic involvement with Robin, likely to protect both her career and her family's expectations. Meanwhile, her turbulent marriage to Bobby Brown, marked by infidelity and addiction, often made headlines. But what never changed through all of life's ups and downs was Robin's steadfast presence until she was quietly pushed away as Houston's world spiraled. When Whitney died in 2012 at just 48 years old, the world mourned the loss of a generational talent. Only afterward did people begin to reconsider what had really been sacrificed to maintain the carefully constructed image. Robin's heartfelt reflections revealed a side of Whitney few ever knew, vulnerable, loyal, and starved for genuine connection. Houston's story isn't just about fame, it's about a woman forced to choose between her heart and her legacy in a world that allowed her voice to soar but kept her love silent. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is remembered as the voice of the civil rights movement, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, and one of the most transformative figures in American history. His sermons inspired hope. His marches demanded justice. Yet behind the iconic speeches and national leadership, King also led a private life that bore emotional complexity, especially when it came to love. While he was famously married to Coretta Scott King, their union, though deeply rooted in mutual respect, was not without strain. Declassified FBI surveillance files and first-hand accounts suggest that Dr. King may have shared a profound personal relationship with Dorothy Cotton, a fellow activist and education director at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Though not officially confirmed during their lifetimes, those close to the movement noted Cotton's unwavering presence by King's side, not just as a colleague, but as a confidant and emotional anchor. In the tightly controlled social atmosphere of the 1960s, especially under the public and political spotlight, Dr. King had to guard every aspect of his image. A known extramarital affair would have been weaponized to undermine both his moral authority and the movement's legitimacy. As such, whatever romantic entanglements he may have had, they were shrouded in secrecy, even among his closest allies. Following his assassination in 1968, whispers of these hidden attachments began to resurface, often dismissed or downplayed. But in recent years, historians have begun reassessing King not just as a saintly figure, but as a complex man, one with private vulnerabilities and unspoken desires. Ultimately, his legacy is not diminished by the suggestion of emotional depth beyond his marriage. Instead, it reminds us that even heroes are human. Dr. King changed the world with love, but perhaps was never truly free to love as he wished in return. Little Richard. Little Richard wasn't just a pioneer of rock and roll, he was its explosion. With wild piano riffs, electric stage presence, and gender-bending flair, he redefined music in the 1950s. Songs like Tutti Frutti and Long Tall Sally weren't just hits, they were anthems that broke barriers. But while his art was flamboyant, his personal life was tightly guarded, twisted in conflict between faith fame and forbidden desire. Born Richard Penniman in Macon, Georgia, he grew up in a deeply religious household that condemned homosexuality. From a young age, Richard knew he was different. He wore makeup, defied masculine norms, and immersed himself in the queer underground scenes of the South. Yet as his star rose, he faced immense pressure to tone it down. Record labels, church leaders, and publicists all demanded a cleaner, more palatable image. Though he hinted at his identity in interviews, at times calling himself omnisexual, or admitting to struggles with same-sex attraction, he never explicitly confirmed long-term partners. One rumored companion dancer, Lee Angel, was frequently seen with him during his peak years. Still, Little Richard frequently renounced homosexuality, especially during religious revivals, calling it unnatural and a temptation he had to fight. His internal tug-of-war played out over decades. He would swing between wild rock stardom and sudden religious retreats, renouncing the secular world, only to return again recharged and conflicted. This cycle wasn't just artistic, it was personal. He longed for authenticity but feared condemnation. As a black gay man in the spotlight during the conservative 1950s and 60s, open expression could have ended his career or, worse, his life. He passed away in 2020 from bone cancer at the age of 87. Even in his final interviews, his language reflected a man still at war with himself. His lovers, if any were long-term, remain unnamed and unclaimed. But his music, full of fire and coded desire, endures. Little Richard changed the world, but could never fully live in it. He opened doors for future artists to express who they are, yet spent his own life locked behind one. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye's music embodied sensuality, heartbreak, and spiritual conflict. From his early Motown hits to his political masterpiece What's Going On, he evolved into one of Black America's most beloved and complex artists. But beneath the smooth vocals and seductive lyrics lay a man tormented by emotional wounds and secret attachments. His most controversial and obscured relationship was with Janice Hunter, whom he met when she was just 17 and he was in his mid-30s. Their romance inspired Gaye's intensely personal 1976 album, I Want You, but the affair was fraught with volatility, infidelity, and emotional manipulation. They married, divorced, and continued an on-and-off connection, one that Marvin never fully explained in public. Some close to him believed Janice wasn't his only deep attachment. Rumors of same-sex encounters and clandestine affairs followed him throughout his life, though never confirmed. Gaye struggled to reconcile his devout religious upbringing with his erotic artistry. Raised by a fanatically strict father who often humiliated and abused him, Marvin carried lifelong guilt about his desires. That shame often translated into substance abuse, paranoia, and emotional instability, particularly when it came to intimacy. His sexual identity, though never labeled, seemed fluid, expressed in lyrics, performance, and journal entries unearthed posthumously. In the years leading up to his death, Marvin retreated into isolation and despair. On April 1, 1984, one day before his 45th birthday, he was shot and killed by his own father during an argument. His death sent shockwaves through the world of music, but his personal truth died with him. Today, Marvin Gaye is rightly celebrated for changing the soul and R&B landscape. Yet few discuss the private demons he faced or the secret loves that shaped his genius. He sang boldly about passion and pain, yet rarely found peace in either. Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor's fearless comedy redefined what stand-up could be. He turned racial trauma, personal flaws, and political outrage into unforgettable routines. But while millions laughed, Pryor lived with a truth he rarely acknowledged publicly: his sexuality and the discreet relationships that shaped his inner world. Raised in a brothel by his grandmother in Peoria, Illinois, Pryor's early exposure to sex violence and exploitation haunted him throughout life. As an adult, he was married 7 times to 5 different women with whom he fathered 7 children. Despite these public relationships, insiders whispered about his private affairs with men, rumors that gained new weight after his death. In 2018, Quincy Jones shocked the world by casually confirming that Pryor had slept with actor Marlon Brando. Shortly after, Pryor's widow, Jennifer Lee, verified it, saying Richard had been open about his bisexuality in his diaries. He had relationships with both men and women, and in the free love era of the 1970s, it wasn't a big deal to him, though it was something he never felt safe sharing with the public. Pryor's own words in memoirs and tapes hint at a man struggling to define himself beyond society's expectations. "There's a thin line between comedy and tragedy," he often said, and nowhere was that more evident than in his personal life. He battled drug addiction, survived a near-fatal incident when he set himself on fire while freebasing cocaine, and suffered from multiple sclerosis later in life. When he passed away in 2005, obituaries praised his revolutionary voice, but left out the truth about who he really was behind the mic. Richard Pryor was not only a comedic genius, he was a man who dared to love outside the lines, even if he had to keep those truths tucked away. His legacy is one of boldness, but his hidden romances reveal something even braver: vulnerability, in a world that never gave him room to be fully seen. Josephine Baker. Josephine Baker dazzled the world with her audacity. Born in St. Louis and rising to fame in 1920s Paris, she became a sensation, dancing in feathers, singing in French, and commanding stages that once denied black performers. But behind the glamour and groundbreaking career lay a woman whose private life was as layered as her performances. Baker's romantic life defied convention. Though she married 4 times and adopted 12 children from different nations, her so-called Rainbow Tribe rumors of her relationships with women and powerful men swirled for decades. She was often linked to French novelist Colette, Mexican artist Frida Kahlo, and American singer Clara Smith. While she never confirmed any same-sex relationships publicly, those close to her knew Baker embraced love without boundaries, regardless of gender. In the rigid social climate of the 20th century, especially for a woman of color, being open about fluid relationships was professionally risky. Baker chose discretion. Her high-profile affair with Swedish Crown Prince Gustav VI Adolf was also kept quiet, partly due to politics, partly due to scandal potential. She understood that visibility had a price, and Josephine paid it to protect the people she loved and the causes she fought for. During World War II, she used her celebrity to spy for the French resistance, seducing German officers while passing coded messages in invisible ink on sheet music. Even then, she kept her closest emotional ties hidden. Her courage was public, her vulnerability private. Baker died in 1975 at age 68. She had just completed a triumphant comeback performance in Paris and was finally being celebrated as both an artist and a humanitarian. Yet the world still knows little about the relationships that gave her strength. Her legend lives in history books, but her heart remains in whispers, testament to a woman who lived fearlessly on stage and carefully off it. Diana Ross. Diana Ross defined elegance, ambition, and black excellence for generations. As the lead singer of the Supremes, she became Motown royalty, then transcended music to become a global icon in film and fashion. But behind the spotlight and glitter, Ross maintained a complex personal life, particularly when it came to love and family. Ross's romantic relationship with Motown founder Berry Gordy was one of the industry's most whispered about connections. The two kept their affair largely hidden, even as it fueled artistic chemistry and creative dominance. In 1971, Diana gave birth to her first child, Rhonda Ross Kendrick. For years, the public believed her then-husband, Robert Ellis Silberstein, was the father. In truth, Rhonda was Gordy's daughter, a fact not revealed until Rhonda was a teenager. Why the secrecy? In the tightly controlled image of Motown's golden age, public knowledge of Ross's relationship with her boss and the resulting child might have invited controversy. Both Ross and Gordy were major assets to the label. Any perception of favoritism or scandal could have tarnished the carefully curated brand they helped build. Beyond Gordy, Ross was known to have close emotional ties with other prominent men, but she rarely shared details. Some speculated that she chose to keep her most meaningful relationships private to preserve her public image as an untouchable star. In later years, Ross married Norwegian businessman Arne Næss Jr., but that too eventually ended in divorce. Despite her fame, Ross remains remarkably guarded about her private life. Interviews often touch on her achievements, not her loves. She stated that her children are her greatest accomplishment, but rarely discusses the emotional dynamics behind how her family came to be. Diana Ross is not just a singer, she's a cultural institution. But even institutions have hidden foundations. Her story reminds us that power often comes at the cost of silence, and some of the most impactful love stories are the ones never fully told. Luther Vandross. Luther Vandross could make a stadium feel like a bedroom. His velvet voice, aching ballads, and poetic vulnerability earned him 8 Grammy Awards and the eternal devotion of fans around the world. But while he sang openly of longing, devotion, and heartbreak, his own love life remained tightly sealed, concealed from the public, even in death. Though rumors about Vandross's sexuality followed him for years, he never publicly addressed them. Close friends, including fellow artists like Patti LaBelle, later confirmed that Luther was a gay man who never came out primarily out of fear. In interviews, LaBelle described how deeply Luther feared rejection from fans, and especially from his mother, who was central to his life. He had a lot of sadness, a lot of pain, she said. He wanted to be loved, but he was afraid to live out loud. Vandross never married and had no publicly acknowledged romantic partners. Despite this, his lyrics, saturated with emotional honesty, hinted at deeply personal experiences. Songs like Wait for Love and A House Is Not a Home suggest intimate yearnings that felt both universal and acutely private. Industry insiders believed he had long-term relationships kept from view, not only because of stigma around homosexuality, but also the particular burden of being a black gay man in an image-conscious R&B industry. As the AIDS epidemic ravaged the music world, Vandross kept his distance from the topic, though many interpreted his silence as strategic rather than unsympathetic. His focus remained on the music, and his performances often became cathartic expressions of the emotions he didn't share in interviews. In 2003, he suffered a stroke that left him in a coma. He never fully recovered and passed away in 2005 at the age of 54. To this day, he is revered as one of the greatest voices in modern music. But the love that powered that voice, the heartbreak, the secrecy, the invisible connections died with him. Luther Vandross gave the world his heart in song, but he never felt safe enough to share where that heart truly belonged. Jesse Owens. Jesse Owens was the embodiment of American athletic excellence. His 4 gold medals at the 1936 Berlin Olympics dealt a public blow to Adolf Hitler's Aryan supremacy narrative and made Owens a global symbol of triumph over racism. But despite his fame and patriotic symbolism, Owens's personal life held its own quiet defiance, most notably his secret love affair with a German woman during the very Olympics that made him a legend. While representing the U.S. in Nazi Germany, Owens reportedly formed a romantic bond with Luz Long's sister, or in other accounts, a woman named Lucy or Helga. Though unconfirmed by Owens himself, several biographers and contemporaries described a close emotional connection between him and a white German woman during the Games. Given the charged racial atmosphere of both Germany and the US in the 1930s, such a relationship would have been scandalous, even dangerous for both parties. Owens returned home to segregation, where he was not permitted to use the same hotels or entrances as white Olympians. Despite his victories, he struggled for work and faced persistent racism. While he publicly remained with his wife Minnie, with whom he had 3 daughters, whispers of his Olympic romance persisted in the background. The alleged affair produced rumors of a child, a story never confirmed by Owens or his family. German publications and authors occasionally revived the tale in post-war years, suggesting a lineage that was denied both recognition and reunion. Owens, who spent much of his later life speaking about sportsmanship and racial unity, never addressed these rumors, possibly out of respect for his family or to avoid tarnishing his image in a deeply conservative America. When he died in 1980 at age 66 from lung cancer, he was hailed as a national treasure. Yet the woman from Berlin, if she ever truly existed in the way accounts describe, remained a mystery. Jesse Owens' story reminds us that even the most visible heroes often leave behind invisible legacies of love, of compromise, and of what could never be good. Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison changed American literature forever. As the first Black woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, her novels beloved. The Bluest Eye Song of Solomon peeled back the layers of generational trauma, Black identity, and the intimacy of survival. But while her work was deeply emotional, Morrison's personal life remained tightly guarded, especially when it came to love. Born Chloe Ardelia Wofford in Ohio, Morrison married Jamaican architect Harold Morrison in 1958. The marriage ended after 6 years and she never remarried. Publicly, she focused on her children and her craft, rising through the editorial ranks at Random House, and then into literary superstardom. Yet behind her fierce intellect and commanding presence, there were whispers of an enduring private relationship with a woman in academia, a companion who, according to some insiders, shared Morrison's home and life in her later years. Morrison never confirmed any such relationship. Her interviews consistently pivoted away from her romantic life, emphasizing motherhood, solitude, and intellectual pursuit. Some believe she avoided such disclosures, not out of shame but out of principle. She valued privacy. She wanted the world to talk about her words, not her lovers. Those close to her described her as romantic but discreet. She had deep friendships, some of which may have crossed into more intimate territory. Her letters and notes, many still unpublished, hint at a hunger for connection, though her prose often warned about the risks of love becoming ownership or erasure. Toni Morrison passed away in 2019 at the age of 88. She left behind a legacy that centers Black womanhood, ancestral truth, and unflinching emotional honesty. Still, the identity of the person who held her heart, if anyone truly did, remains unknown. Perhaps that was the point. In a world eager to dissect Black women, Morrison chose autonomy. Her love life was not public domain, it was sacred, protected, and in the end, hers alone. Nina Simone. Nina Simone was a firestorm of brilliance. A classically trained pianist, civil rights warrior, and haunting vocalist, she gave voice to both Black pain and Black power. Her music was fearless. So was her activism. But her romantic life, turbulent, often toxic, and partially hidden, revealed the same emotional rawness that defined her art. Simone's marriage to manager Andrew Stroud was marked by abuse and control, chronicled in her autobiography, I Put a Spell on You. He managed her career with a brutal hand, but behind the scenes, Simone craved a love that felt like liberation. After their split, she had several affairs, some with men of influence, others with artists and fellow rebels. Among those relationships, one remained particularly hushed, her alleged affair with Lorraine Hansberry, the groundbreaking playwright behind A Raisin in the Sun. The two were close friends, but some biographers and queer historians believe they shared more than just ideas. Simone often refers to Hansberry as the love of her life, and after Hansberry's early death, Nina channeled her grief into performances that pulsed with anguish. Simone never publicly identified as bisexual or lesbian. However, her lyrics and behavior suggested fluidity. Songs like Do I Move You and Wild is the Wind pulsed with a longing that transcended traditional definitions. Nina's love was often chaotic, intense, erratic, consuming. And she frequently fled, disappearing into different countries and relationships, sometimes without warning. Mental health struggles, particularly bipolar disorder, further complicated her personal life. But even in her darkest moments, she remained loyal to the idea that love, real love, should be defiant. That may explain why some of her most intimate relationships remained unspoken. In her world, secrecy was protection, not shame. Nina Simone died in 2003 at the age of 70. Her ashes were scattered in several African countries. But her music lives on, still echoing with the fierce, uncontainable love she was never able or willing to fully explain. Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. dazzled across every medium, singing, dancing, acting, and defying racial boundaries in a segregated Hollywood. As the only black member of the Rat Pack, Davis broke barriers but also bore immense pressure to conform. He famously converted to Judaism, married Swedish actress May Britt, during a time when interracial unions were taboo, and pushed through bigotry with sheer charisma. Yet his personal life had shadows most never saw. While Davis's high-profile romances were well-documented, whispers of his bisexuality trailed him for decades. Friends and industry insiders claimed he had discreet affairs with men, especially during his younger years in New York's underground nightclub scene. His close friendship with comedian Paul Mooney and other black queer artists sparked further speculation, though Davis never publicly acknowledged any same-sex relationships. His reasons were understandable. Even as a star, Davis was often one scandal away from career destruction. The public barely tolerated his interracial marriage. Adding queerness to the mix would have meant professional suicide in 1950s America. Davis struggled with addiction, depression, and the loneliness of being the only one in every room. His marriages, though real, were sometimes described as strategic. He longed for genuine love, but often settled for survival. When he died of throat cancer in 1990 at age 64, Sammy Davis Jr. was celebrated as a showbiz legend. But the full truth of his emotional world likely died with him, buried under tuxedos, stage lights, and the weight of always having to smile. Paul Mooney. Paul Mooney was the razor-edged voice behind some of the most revolutionary comedy of the last half-century. As Richard Pryor's longtime writing partner, a Chappelle's Show standout, and the pen behind some of the sharpest critiques of race in America, Mooney lived on the edge of controversy and truth. But when it came to his own heart, he was far more reserved. While Mooney never publicly came out as gay, those who knew him personally often spoke of his long-term romantic relationships with men. His bond with Pryor was creative and intense, and later confirmed by Pryor's widow as being briefly physical. Despite living in a time when black gay men were heavily marginalized, Mooney refused to apologize for who he was, even if he chose not to speak openly about it. He often joked about homosexuality in his routines not as ridicule, but as sharp commentary on society's hypocrisy. He knew how to turn queerness into a mirror for America's double standards. Still, Mooney maintained tight control over his image, never naming his partners or speaking publicly about his sexuality. In private, Mooney was known to be deeply loyal, emotionally complex, and fiercely protective of his chosen family. He also battled with health issues later in life, including dementia. Yet through it all, he kept his core identity intact, proud, private, and powerful. When Paul Mooney passed away in 2021, the headlines celebrated his comedy genius. But they missed the man who, behind closed doors, loved with the same intensity he brought to his work, quietly, boldly, and with deep conviction. Phyllis Hyman. Phyllis Hyman's voice could shatter glass and heal hearts in the same breath. A jazz and R&B powerhouse, she was known for haunting ballads like Living All Alone and You Know How to Love Me. But the woman behind the microphone lived a life riddled with emotional pain and romantic secrecy. Hyman never married and had no children, though she was briefly engaged. Despite her stunning beauty and on-stage sensuality, she often spoke about feeling undesired or abandoned. Friends hinted that many of her deepest relationships were with women, though Phyllis never openly labeled her sexuality. In an industry that forced women to sell a specific image, Hyman chose discretion, yet her songs often told a different story. She struggled for years with bipolar disorder and depression conditions that were misunderstood and untreated in the Black community at the time. As her career stalled and her inner turmoil deepened, Phyllis turned to alcohol and drugs as temporary escape. She made multiple suicide attempts, her pain quietly underscoring every heartbreak anthem she ever sang. On June 30th, 1995, just hours before she was scheduled to perform at the Apollo Theater, Hyman died by suicide at age 45. She left a note saying she couldn't stand the pain any longer. Her death was a seismic shock, but not a surprise to those closest to her. For years, she had been crying out through music, hinting at a longing never satisfied and a love life never fully accepted. Today, Phyllis Hyman is remembered as a soulful siren taken too soon. But her legacy is more than music. It's a reflection of how silence, especially for Black queer women, can be both armor and cage. Octavia Butler. Octavia Butler shattered boundaries in science fiction, a genre historically dominated by white men. As a Black woman with a uniquely philosophical lens, she penned groundbreaking works like Kindred Parable of the Sower and Wild Seed, using speculative fiction to dissect race, gender power, and survival. But while her fiction was expansive and world-building, her personal life remained conspicuously minimal by choice. Butler never married, never had children, and rarely spoke publicly about love or intimacy. Biographers and scholars have long speculated about her sexuality. Her writings filled with non-traditional families, queer-coded characters, and layered explorations of identity often hinted at fluidity. Several close friends and literary peers suggested that she was in a long-term relationship with a woman, possibly someone in the academic or publishing world. But Butler kept her emotional life fiercely private. She once wrote that solitude is my drug of choice, yet her journals also reveal longings for connection and heartbreak over love, not returned. Butler may have avoided public discussion of relationships not due to shame, but because she believed her work and not her personal life should speak the loudest. She passed away unexpectedly in 2006 from a fall related to a stroke, leaving behind a legacy that only continues to grow in influence. While she never shared her love life with the world, her stories offered glimpses of a woman deeply attuned to human desire, emotional complexity, and the radical potential of chosen love. Eartha Kitt. Eartha Kitt was sultry, sharp, and impossible to forget. With her iconic purr, commanding stage presence, and unforgettable role as Catwoman, she was both sex symbol and provocateur. But behind her sensuality was a woman who kept the truth of her love life under careful lock and key. Kitt had a famously complicated relationship with men. Her brief marriage to John MacDonald in the 1960s ended in divorce, and she often joked about being too much woman for one man. Throughout her life, rumors swirled about her relationships with women, particularly during her time in Europe, where she spent years in relative exile from the US for her outspoken political views. Friends claimed she had romantic affairs with powerful women in fashion and theater, though Kitt never confirmed these publicly. Her daughter, Kit Shapiro, once described her mother as a private soul who didn't believe in labeling her sexuality. Eartha was deeply committed to autonomy over her body, her career, and her heart. Her performances, however, often betrayed a deeper emotional truth. Songs like I Want to Be Evil and Guess Who I Saw Today dripped with longing and emotional nuance. Beneath her bold exterior was a woman who had been abandoned by her mother, raised in poverty, and taught early on that vulnerability could be dangerous. When Kit died in 2008 of colon cancer, tributes celebrated her talent, activism, and unapologetic spirit. Yet her most intimate relationships remained cloaked in mystery. In the end, she owned her sensuality without giving it away to public scrutiny, fierce, fearless, and forever enigmatic. Billy Preston. Billy Preston was a musical prodigy. Dubbed the fifth Beatle for his unforgettable keyboard work on tracks like Get Back, he also played with legends like Ray Charles, the Rolling Stones, and Aretha Franklin. Yet as bright as his music shone, his personal life was dimmed by the heavy burden of secrecy. Preston was gay, something he confided only to a few close friends. Raised in the deeply religious and often homophobic world of gospel music, he endured abuse as a child and feared rejection from both his family and fan base. While he exuded joy on stage privately, he battled depression, drug addiction, and the trauma of a life lived in the closet. In interviews, he sidestepped questions about love. Though he was never linked to any public romantic partners, those who knew him confirmed that he had meaningful relationships, most notably with men in the music industry, but was terrified of exposure. The gospel world in particular could be merciless to queer men, and Preston bore the scars of that duality. He was also one of the few black artists openly embraced by white rock royalty, yet even that didn't insulate him from internalized shame and substance abuse. After years of health problems, he died in 2006 from respiratory failure following a long coma. He was 59. Billy Preston remains a musical legend, but his legacy also reminds us of how many queer black artists gave us everything except the truth about who they really were. Not because they didn't want to, but because the world wouldn't let them. Billy D. Williams. Billy D. Williams became the embodiment of suave. As Lando Calrissian in Star Wars and the irresistible romantic lead in Lady Sings the Blues, he redefined masculinity for a generation of black men. But behind his velvet voice and debonair image lay a personal truth that long went unspoken. In a 2019 interview, Williams surprised fans by describing himself as embracing both masculine and feminine energy. He referred to himself using both he and she pronouns, a revelation that sparked speculation about his sexuality. Though he later clarified he didn't mean he was gender fluid in a traditional sense, the statement still broke ground in the conversation around black male identity and queerness. Throughout his life, Williams has been married multiple times and has children, but there were quiet murmurs within industry circles that he also engaged in same-sex relationships, particularly in the 1970s. Hollywood scene, an era of glamour liberation and hidden truths. These stories were never confirmed, and Williams has remained deliberately vague, perhaps out of a desire to avoid labels or to protect loved ones. His career has spanned over 6 decades, and he's always been careful with his image, gracious but private, bold but reserved. In doing so, he opened space for nuanced expressions of masculinity in black culture without ever declaring himself as anything but authentic. Billy D. Williams may never fully explain his emotional or romantic past, but in choosing to acknowledge the complexity of his identity, he's done something rare, inviting others to do the same. Cicely Tyson. Cicely Tyson was elegance and endurance personified. With a career that defied stereotypes and elevated black womanhood, she was not only a groundbreaking actress, but also a symbol of dignity. While her professional legacy is widely known, Tyson's personal life was cloaked in intentional silence, especially her romantic entanglements. Her highly publicized and tumultuous relationship with jazz icon Miles Davis captivated headlines. They married in 1981, though their relationship stretched back years earlier. Despite his infidelities and substance abuse, Tyson remained protective of Davis, believing in the man beneath the myth. Their marriage ended in 1989, but her loyalty to him remained even after his death. Yet Davis was not her only great love, just the only one the public knew. In her memoir, Just As I Am, Tyson hinted at deeply emotional relationships outside the spotlight, including one that lasted for over a decade with a man whose name she never revealed. Many close to her believe she had romantic connections with women during her early years in theater, but she chose not to disclose these due to the cultural expectations placed upon her. A devout woman of faith and purpose, Tyson once said, "My silence has always protected me." She fought her battles off stage against racism, sexism, and loneliness with the same quiet strength that defined her roles. When she passed in 2021 at the age of 96, the world mourned a legend. But the full map of her heart remains hers alone. Tyson taught us that true power sometimes lies in what we choose not to say. Bessie Smith. Bessie Smith ruled the 1920s with a voice that could shatter glass and a presence that demanded attention. Dubbed the Empress of the Blues, she was bold, brash, and utterly unfiltered. Yet behind her powerful music was a complex love life, one that defied norms and dared to exist in the shadows. Smith was married to Jack G., a volatile relationship marked by jealousy and betrayal. But she also had numerous affairs with women, including a long-rumored romance with singer Lillian Simpson. In fact, her bisexuality was an open secret within the blues community. She frequented LGBTQ-friendly speakeasies and proudly declared her attraction to women in private circles. Her 1930s recording, It's Dirty But Good, is believed to carry coded lyrics about same-sex love, and other songs hinted at sexual fluidity. Smith never publicly identified with any label, but she lived unapologetically drinking hard, loving harder, and carving space for herself in a world that wanted to box her in. Still, the pressures of racism, sexism, and homophobia weighed heavily on her. Her career declined as the Great Depression hit, and her personal life remained stormy. She died tragically in 1937 after a car accident allegedly delayed treatment due to hospital segregation, though that claim remains disputed. Bessie Smith's life was one of fire-feeling and fearless love, especially the kind society tried to erase. Today, she stands as a symbol not just of musical greatness, but of emotional defiance. Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes shaped the voice of the Harlem Renaissance crafting poetry that celebrated Black life with rhythm, sorrow, joy, and longing. But while his creative genius illuminated the struggles and beauty of his community, his personal life was cloaked in mystery, especially his sexuality. Hughes never married and was known to live alone, often traveling abroad to places where his privacy could be respected. Scholars and biographers have long speculated that he was gay, citing the romantic tone of certain unpublished poems, letters, and the company he kept, often surrounded by other queer artists and writers of the time. Yet Hughes never publicly addressed his sexuality, perhaps fearing it would jeopardize his voice as a cultural icon during a deeply homophobic era. He preferred to be seen as a chronicler of the Black experience rather than the subject of gossip. In private, friends recalled him as soft-spoken and guarded, yet deeply empathetic. The emotional depth of his writing, especially his reflections on loneliness, displacement, and identity, hinted at a longing rarely acknowledged aloud. Langston Hughes died of complications from prostate cancer in 1967. Though the world celebrates his words, his most intimate truths remain delicately preserved between the lines. Zora Neale Hurston. Zora Neale Hurston was a force. Novelist, anthropologist, playwright, she was a dazzling intellect whose voice stood apart even during the Harlem Renaissance. Her groundbreaking novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God, offered one of literature's earliest depictions of a Black woman's autonomy. But Zora's own love life was complex, fiercely private, and often left unspoken. Hurston married twice, but both marriages were brief. In her letters and personal notes, she often referred to the limitations of conventional relationships. Scholars have speculated she may have had emotional or romantic ties with women in academic and artistic circles, but Hurston never confirmed or denied such speculation. She lived her truth by forging her own path, uninterested in expectations of womanhood, sexuality, or respectability. She often said she loved people as individuals, not genders, suggesting a fluidity of emotion rarely acknowledged in her era. Despite achieving literary acclaim, Hurston died in poverty and obscurity in 1960, buried in an unmarked grave. Today, her legacy has been resurrected by generations of readers who see in her not just a writer, but a rebel who loved deeply whether or not she ever spoke it aloud. Jesse Belvin. Jesse Belvin was destined for stardom. With a smooth tenor and timeless hits like Goodnight My Love, he was hailed as a bridge between doo-wop and soul, a black crooner poised to rival even Nat King Cole. But behind the velvet voice was a life filled with secrecy, ambition, and tragedy. Though married to Joanne Belvin and publicly seen as a devoted husband, insiders whispered that Jesse's emotional life was more complex. Some who knew him in the Los Angeles music scene claimed he maintained a secret romantic relationship with a male producer early in his career. Whether out of fear industry pressure or personal conflict, Jesse never addressed such rumors, and the truth may have died with him. He was outspoken about civil rights and unafraid to integrate audiences during a segregated era, an act that earned him death threats. Tragically, in 1960, after performing at a racially integrated concert in Little Rock, Arkansas, Jesse and his wife died in a suspicious car crash. The brakes had reportedly been tampered with, but no one was ever held accountable. Belvin was just 27. His life, like his love, ended far too soon. While the world remembers his romantic ballads, what he never said about his own heart echoes even louder today. Jackie Wilson. Jackie Wilson was magnetic. With explosive stage energy and hits like Lonely Teardrops and To Be Loved, he helped lay the foundation for modern soul and pop. Yet while the world saw a flashy performer, the real Jackie lived behind closed doors, grappling with secrets, betrayal, and internal pain. Publicly, Wilson had 4 children and multiple relationships with women. But those close to him said he carried secrets, including rumored affairs with both men and women. In a rigidly heteronormative industry, Wilson concealed any personal complexity behind a charming, flirtatious persona. His private life was riddled with chaos. He was shot by a lover, sued for paternity, and trapped in exploitative management deals. Tragically, in 1975, he collapsed on stage from a heart attack and fell into a coma, never fully recovering. He remained hospitalized for nearly 9 years, dying in 1984 at age 49. In death, Jackie Wilson became a cautionary tale about fame's cruelty. But his story is also one of a man who poured everything into performance, perhaps because he could never reveal everything off stage. And now, we ask you, how many other legends were forced to love in silence just to protect their legacy? From whispered romances to lifelong secrecy, these 23 icons carried private truths the world wasn't ready to hear. But do secrets diminish greatness, or do they reveal the painful price of fame in a world that demanded silence? Tell us what you think in the comments. Should their truths have been spoken, or was their silence their final act of strength? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence for more stories that honor the unseen sides of greatness.